to the channel. This week I'm going to show you some artwork that came out of a limited palette that I chose. I worked that way for the past couple of weeks. I'm also going to share some tips with you on picking out supplies. I'm going to go over what I used and some things you might want to think of when you're choosing what to work with. So why bother working in a limited palette? Mine was almost monochromatic. I worked mostly in green with some neutrals, and Lynn later on brought in a complement. The reason I started working with one color for a while was essentially I was trying to get back into art making after I had recovered from surgery, and I was still really tired and my brain was still really tired, to be honest, and I didn't want to have to make a lot of decisions. And when you work with a monochromatic color scheme or a limited palette, it kind of gets rid of a lot of decisions for you and allows you to just work more intuitively. This has the added benefit of making everything automatically go together. It's going to be very harmonious because it's limited or monochromatic. Lastly, and just as importantly, limiting your palette gives you the opportunity to notice other things. So anytime you take something away in your artwork, like variety of color, it's going to give more emphasis to value differences or texture differences because there's one less potential distraction in your artwork. And this can give a really easy way too if you're working on composition, if you're trying to get better at value schemes or things like that, or working with warm and cool. Limiting your palette can give you an opportunity to really easily focus on those things because they'll stand out more in your artwork and be easier to see. And also back up and running is my Slow Sunday newsletter. It's meant to just give you a little bit of inspiration at the beginning of the week and a few highlights of maybe something you've missed that you want to catch up on, like a YouTube video. So if you're looking for more inspiration, you can head over to the link below or my website and sign up for that newsletter. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is show you the sketches that I had made first that inspired all of this, and talk about the supplies I was using and added in over time, and then we'll talk about the paintings that came out of the sketches, because I think that's important. Is when you start doing something, if you can stick with it for at least a week or two, it gives you an opportunity to create a thread to follow and develop some ideas more. It doesn't mean that you have to work that way forever. It's just giving your brain something to settle into and an opportunity to learn something new before you rush off into the next thing. All right, so let's dive in. So this is my sketchbook. I only did one in here before I moved on to doing sketches on sheets of paper, but I'll go ahead and show you the first one. And the idea for this came from just the desire to pull out a whole bunch of different materials in essentially one color and be able to just layer them without having to think about whether they were going to go together. This would allow me to focus on things like shape and value and just playing with layering materials in a different way. This has a little bit of everything in it because, like I said, I just wanted to play. So this has everything from Ecoline markers to Tombos to Neocolor, my Liquitex paints, Poscas, colored pencils, and some pan pastel. I really just threw everything at the sky, and I used a photo of a botanical garden as a reference. So the other thing I've been noticing lately, and I noticed here, is I like something man-made or structural within all of the natural elements that I tend to use in my artwork and landscapes and such. And that's really important to pay attention to, and I'm always saying this in every video: pay attention to what you really like, pay attention to what you really don't like. They're going to lead you to where you want to be, and where you want to be is making artwork that's going to make you happy, you know, something where you can really enjoy the process. I really enjoyed doing this, so I made some sketches on loose sheets of paper after this. First one I did was this one, and I think I'll show you the next one, and I do like some things about it. I think this was a little bit more successful in many ways. But again, there's that man-made element that I brought in with the roof of the greenhouse, and I really like the kind of wonky pattern that that makes. And this is all mixed media too. Again, I was using the same set of supplies. So pan pastels, markers, pencils. This is watercolor crayon, the Daniel Smith ones. And it's got a little bit of everything, and I brought in that same mark making from the other one into here, but I paid more attention to composition in this one. So in this one, I really just wanted to sit down and go wild that morning. It was like a Sunday morning, and I grabbed my coffee, and I wanted to play without really thinking about anything. But in this one, I wanted to consider the composition a little bit more and how to draw, you know, the eye around the piece. And I really like how this water came out in here, and the mark making and the repetitive mark making too, and the patterns that show up throughout. So I was really happy with how this came out. Now the next one, I really like the lily pads on here, but it got a little weird. So there's a lot of things, again, that I do like about this. I like the lily pads, and I like using line to do some of them and not filling them in. In the reference photo, there was like a big branch or set of branches that came over, and I like a lot of repetitive things in my artwork. It gives it some rhythm in certain areas, but when I brought it in here, it just almost looks like a crazy hand reaching over the botanical garden to, like, I don't know, attack the lily pads. So there's some stuff I definitely do like in here and would do again and pull into the next one. I really like this lily pad here too. But yeah, things got weird up here. I don't know, maybe if I chopped off the top of it, it would look a little less bizarre. But okay. So after that, Emma Carlisle had a Patreon session. And as part of these sessions, you end up drawing from a whole bunch of different photos over a period of time. I decided to do mine as all little vignettes on the same piece of paper. This is using, again, all the same materials. There's pan pastel in here, there's gouache, there's Neocolor and Poscas and everything you can think of. I think the only thing that's not in here is acrylic paint. And this was an opportunity, again, to use those supplies to build some scenes and some figures, and also to start bringing in some of a complement. This is like a maroon color that's showing up in here, and there's some pink pan pastel in here as well, and in throughout here, and some maroon in there again. This was an easy way to work with complements because the complements that I was using to green were really subtle, kind of neutralized complements. There's not any bright red in here, and so it was easy to put this together. And this scene over here ended up being a reference for me to pull into some paintings, as did this one over here. And that's what I was talking about before, is when you find something that you enjoyed and you feel was successful and sort of scratches that itch for you, do another iteration of it in a different way, in a different format. I ended up doing mine all in just paint, and that gave me the chance to just explore that idea further, explore ways I can do that scene with different marks, and just see what happens. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what supplies I used for these and give you some tips on picking out a monochromatic or a limited color palette. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at the paintings. So this is everything I used on those first few sketches for the most part. And what I want to talk to you about is when you're going to do, especially if you're doing monochromatic, but even if you're doing a really limited palette and you want to do a mixed media version, meaning you're not going to just mix colors the whole time with paint, you really need to think about the different values and color saturation you grab when you grab supplies for your limited palette. So the first thing that you want to think about is value, because that is what your eye notices first. Value is mostly how you compose a painting. It's what holds the whole thing together. And if you're going to do this with a bunch of different supplies, you need to make sure that you have enough value range to give you some lights and some darks. Most colors, especially saturated colors, are going to fall in the middle of the value scale. So these are the colored pencils I chose. These are Caran d'Ache Luminance and Derwent Lightfast pencils. I think that's all of them that I used. And I picked a pretty good variety, but if you'll notice, I made sure to pick a really light one in here. Most of these are mid-tone, and there's a few really, really dark ones in here, but it's so important to have a good range when you're working this way. The other thing I made sure, and the other thing you want to think about, is warm and cool. So like a cool green is going to have more of a blue tinge to it. A warm green is going to have more of a yellow tinge. That's another difference. And when you're taking away a variety of color, you're going to end up playing with all these different differences. This is what gives you contrast. Contrast is more than just a difference in value. It's also a difference in things like saturation or color temperature. So having that variety of color temperature and value in here gave me an opportunity to really play and dig into my art. I made largely the same consideration with my markers. There's some warms and cool throughout all of them. I don't have any super dark markers in here, but that was okay for me because I had enough dark things for other materials. But these are water soluble. The Tombos make two different kinds of marks. So if you haven't seen these before, one end has a brush tip and the other end has a pointier tip. I almost never use that one. But it's just another way to make marks. And again, when you're working monochromatically or with a limited palette, when you can dive into these other differences that aren't attributed directly to different colors, those things become more apparent. So part of this was having an opportunity to have all different ways to make marks. And then I also had a couple of acrylic markers. This Posca marker was like the best shade of green. I went from hating this marker to loving it. Working this way, for some reason, I loved playing with this with all the other greens, even though I don't usually grab for it. And then this is I think it's a Montana marker. And this one's new and it's a super bright lime green. I might actually open it up and put some burnt sienna in there to just calm it down a little, but this was a fun marker to play with and it goes on super nice. These, if you haven't used them before, are Pan Pastel and they're super fun. This is a really dark green and I use this to dirty up the pages, and it's also what made the stripes on here in the background. So before I painted or drew on these, I took some pink Pan Pastel and that really dark green one, and I went throughout all the little panels and just made some different marks. And I really liked how that came out on there. This is a Daniel Smith watercolor stick, and these are super fun if you haven't seen them before. Let me just grab this. I'll dip it in some water. But you can dip them in water and draw with them. Some people just use these to dip into like it's a pan. But they're very saturated and they last a long time and they go a long way. So that was also fun to play with. And then I grabbed some Neocolor ones, and I'm limited in which colors I have for this, but I grabbed all the greens I had. There's some warm greens and a neutral, and that was enough to just give me some variety. This is the gouache palette that I used. Most of these are Holbein, and this just gave me some opaque paint to work with and layer. So after I was working with greens for a while, like I said, I added in some complements, and these are all for the most part pretty subtle. I think I grabbed this, but I didn't actually use it in anything. It's just a Neocolor, and these are just some markers, again, more Tombos and Ecoline markers, and just some really soft light pinks, some darker reds to work in a pop of saturated color. And these are watercolor markers from Faber-Castell, and again, some colored pencils in the same brand. And these just go really well with the greens without looking Christmassy too. So I was really happy to do that. And the only other thing I added in here or there were a few neutrals. This is just another like peachy beigey Ecoline marker and a white and ivory Posca. These are super fun because when you go over something with them, they're kind of transparent. They're not as opaque as a lot of the other Poscas, and so you can kind of knock something back or just give something a different kind of texture. Now that we've taken a look at some of the sketches and supplies, we're going to go ahead and jump into the paintings. And like I mentioned before, this was an opportunity for me to take what I liked from the sketches, leave the things I don't like, and pull them into some artwork so that I can develop those ideas further. And in fact, one piece in particular, I ended up painting multiple times, and I think I might actually end up painting it a few more times because I'm still interested in the composition and the elements that are in that piece of art. And had I given up this thread too soon and not even bothered to try bringing my sketches into painting, I never would have found that out. So it's really important, if you can, to stick with something for just a little bit of time to give you an opportunity to develop an idea further so that you can learn something from it before you move on to the next thing. So this is the stack of paintings. And I'm going to show you the first two actually were done several months ago before this whole sort of green thread started happening. But the reason I'm showing them to you here is they are sort of the origin of the green. Things were sort of trending in that direction to working with green a lot. I think way before I was really consciously aware that that's what I wanted to do. And so this was just a really quick painting of a house, and a lot of what I was playing with was just the warms and the cools and the value of the different greens and how many ways I could work that in there and the different marks that I could make. And since that was the focus of what I was doing, I kept the walkway simple and the houses simple as well, and just added some pink in here for a really subtle complement. In this one, it's pretty monochromatic except for the blue sky. The rest of it's just some neutrals in there, but it was the same idea as the other one. I just wanted to play with different greens and different values I could get and different marks and things like that, because I wanted those value differences and the marks to stand out really more than anything else in the painting. And so I kept it really simple, and I think I drew it in with a green neo color, so there's some even pops of green and some unexpected places in here as well, and I really like that. That's part of why I started using neo color 1s instead of the 2s, is I wanted the marks to stay. I didn't want them to get mixed up in the paint. And then this one was inspired from those sketches from the Patreon session. So this one is a little bit different. This is the original, and if you'll notice, it's a different aspect ratio. And so I got rid of these guys and squished in some other parts of the image or the drawing, and then I made the fence in different kind of proportion to the house. So again, on here, certain elements are missing, and I made this bigger with the fence and created some shadows just to give it some more mark making and repetition and some contrast down here and make it interesting. And I added some birds up there again to add contrast, and I kept those stripes with the pan pastel in the background that were in the sketches as well. And I'm pretty happy with how that came out, and I like the variety of darks and light greens and the warms and cools and the way they move your eye around the piece. This one was also based on one of the Patreon session sketches, so that's the sketch, and I really liked the composition and how the sketch came out. And so I use it not to copy it exactly, but as like a roadmap to making other paintings from it. And so this was the version I did from that, and I kept the stripes from the pan pastel in there that were also in the sketch. And I like the way it added some kind of like scuff marks in here underneath the paint. And I was really happy with the way that turned out, and it's got sort of this stormy sky in the background. But overall, I was really happy with that one. And then I took a break from that particular image and I did another botanical. So this is based off one of the sketches that I showed you earlier. It's based off of this one. And so because I was doing it in paint, it's going to look different and the colors are going to look different. And since this is all mixed media, it's easy to get a lot of variety and a lot of differences because you're using a lot of different materials and you can quite literally just pick up the color that you want. You don't have to mix it. It's just an opportunity to use like a buffet of supplies. When you take something like this and you try to put it into a painting, it's going to be a different experience because you're having to mix all the colors and you're not just grabbing different things. You have to be mindful of grabbing different brushes to create all these different marks. Because if we want the variety that's in the sketch piece with a bunch of mixed media stuff, we're using one media to make a painting, right? We're using paint, so you have to find other ways to get that variety back in there. So this is obviously much more simplified than the sketch, but that's fine. It still works, and I'm loving the pop of red I brought in up here and the repetition of mark making in this area, and I was really happy with the way that turned out, and I love the little leaves in the tree too. And then the last one I did was again based on that same image from the Emma Carlisle session. On this one, because of the proportions, I cut off the bottom, which had that stone wall with the rocks on it. So it was really fun to take this same idea and transfer it onto a canvas and just play with it in a way that is a little bit different. See if I can line them all up. This is kind of what I wanted to show you, and what I think is important about this video again is just taking an idea and carrying it through in different ways, because look how different all of these look from each other. Something is shifted. This was the first one and it's got a lot of white in it and open space. This one, some of that is filled in, and the values and things like that are just a little bit different, but it's still pretty similar to this. And then this one's even more different. This looks even more monochromatic than this does, and it looks really muted and cool and green, and it just has a different feel to it than, say, this one does. So that's why I think it's important when you're trying an idea, carry it through a few times and make sure you follow that thread. Well, that is it. I hope you enjoyed the video this week. If you are looking for more from me, I do post over on Instagram occasionally. And again, I have that newsletter that's going to be coming out every Sunday. So if you would like to get some inspiration and keep on top of things you may have missed, head on over to my website and you can sign up for the newsletter. I'll see you next week.